Hi everyone. Before we go into what an RLHF task looks like, you need to understand what is the flow of a task on the platform. So think of Outlier as this massive data producing factory. The data that you produce is then used to train these models and improve their capabilities. So after a task is done, it needs to pass certain quality checks to make sure that the model learns from the best possible data. This is why there are several review layers consisting of people who have really high quality and experience on the project. Now, as soon as you submit a task, your task is sent to the first review layer. Now, this review layer will check for any issues with your task, making sure that your task follow proper guidelines of the project, that you've provided the right feedback, etc. There are review layers which are dedicated to working for checking AI usage in tasks or similarity between different prompts, just to make sure that there is no unfair means used in the completion of the tasks. Based on the quality requirements of a particular project, there could be anywhere from 1 to 12 review layers, making sure only the highest quality data goes into the model's fine-tuning process. In a typical task, you will have to write a prompt, rate some responses, fill out any other dimensions that are required by the project. And whenever a reviewer is reviewing your task, the reviewer will check if your task follows the proper guideline, if it is matching the requirements of the project, if the ratings that you have mentioned are correct or not. And finally, they will check for the correctness of the other details that you have provided in that particular task. Now, based on how your task is, they can either approve the task or they can reject the task. If a reviewer approves your task, they will give it a score in the range of 3 to 5. When a score of 3 or 4 is provided, that would mean that there are some small mistakes that you have committed in your task, but the reviewer was able to fix it himself. Otherwise, if there's any fundamental issue in the task itself, for example, if the prompt itself is wrong, that violates the project guidelines, it would mean writing a new prompt. It would mean generating other model responses, then rewriting the ratings of the model response, etc. Like this is basically doing the entire task again, in which case the reviewer may choose to reject a particular task with a rating of either a 1 or a 2. Otherwise, if there is any fundamental issues with the task itself, and correcting them would mean doing the entire task again, in those cases, the reviewer will reject the task and provide a feedback on that task. Now, this task is then SBQ'd or sent back to queue, where you can attempt this task again and correct it based on the feedback that is provided by the reviewer. Now, let us discuss what are the different entry barriers or filters for a particular project. Any typical project on Outlier will have a combination of these filters. Based on your skill set, once you're assigned a particular project, you have to clear the project course. After that, you have to pass the course quiz that is based on the project course. Once you have passed the course quiz, you have to attend the benchmarks or assessment task for that project. In a benchmark task, you're provided with a sample task in which you have to find out the mistakes in the task and ultimately fill out a form at the very end of the task. If ever you encounter a benchmark task, at the top of your dashboard while you're attempting the task, it will say assessment task. And in these types of tasks, you don't have to change anything within the task itself. All you have to do is to go through the task, find out the mistakes that there are in the task, and then fill out the form at the very end of the task, mentioning what all mistakes you found. If you pass the benchmark task, you are then free to work on production level tasks. But every project has its own task wall. If you have just onboarded a project, you will only be allowed a certain number of production tasks initially, let's say 3 or 4 tasks. Once you complete those tasks, you will have to then wait for the human feedbacks to arrive in order to continue tasking on the project. The estimated turnaround time for a feedback of the task varies a lot. It is based on how many tasks are present in the review layers and how many reviewers are there in that particular layer. And sometimes you might have feedbacks coming to you within the same day. Sometimes it can take a couple of days before you receive the feedbacks on the task that you've submitted. And now, once you have cleared the task wall and you have good ratings on the task that you submitted, you can continue working on as many tasks as you want, as many production level tasks as you want. Now, let us look into what does tasking look like in an RLHF project. In an RLHF project, you basically have to simulate real world chatbot conversations with the model. And your goal is to identify failures in the model's response. These failures are also called as deviations. It can also be referred to as stumping the model or finding out gaps in the model's knowledge. Now, finding out failures or gaps in the model's knowledge is really critical to tasking in an RLHF project. And here is why. Let us imagine that I am Outlier and you are OpenAI, and I come up to you and I say, hey, I have some data that I believe you can use to improve your latest state-of-the-art AI models. And you will be like, hey, that sounds good. Show me the data that you have. And if it turns out that the data I'm providing you is pretty basic, it is asking questions like, write a Python code for factorial of a number using recursion, or you're providing any typical DSA or CP type questions, you as OpenAI will not accept that data because your model is already pretty well trained on that data. You want data where your models are currently failing so that you can use that data to fine tune your models to make sure that they perform better on those types of tasks, so to increase their reasoning and coding abilities. Now, this is where it is really important to fail the model, because once you fail the model, you expose the model's knowledge gap, and then you create data which fills that particular gap.